When she stepped onto the stage, everyone laughed. She was silent, ordinary, but there was something about her, a calmness no one could understand. She didn't pull the trigger. Yet, she became everyone's target. And then, with a single bullet, she didn't hit the game, but the system. The real story begins now. Don't forget to subscribe. When she pushed open the rusty door of the shooting range, all eyes turned to her. Mia stepped inside, head slightly tilted, with a simple sports bag slung over her shoulder. There was no team badge on her, nor was she wearing an eye-catching sniper jacket. Her faded gray sweater, sleeves that reached her wrists, and old jeans, everything about her looked too ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that anyone might have thought she accidentally walked in. But Mia's steps weren't uncertain. They were quiet, yet cautious, as if she was revisiting a place both familiar and intimidating. Among those inside, the most noticeable was Eric, a young but cocky shooter. His father's gun company was the sponsor, and whenever he spoke, the curve of his lips was sharper than his weapon. When he saw Mia, he lowered his glasses and let his gaze drift over her. His eyes held both mockery and curiosity. "Today's kid's day, huh?" he muttered, and his teammates began laughing. Mia didn't look at any of them. Her eyes were fixed on the target at the farthest corner of the range. The sounds around her faded into a distant hum. When she approached the officer, her name wasn't on the list. "Are you a contestant?" she was asked, and she slowly shook her head. After saying her name, there was a brief moment of silence. Mia Keller. No one knew her. The officer raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you have your own weapon?" Mia didn't respond. She just set her bag down. Those who saw the rifle coming out of the bag mocked her at first. It was old. It had paint chips. It didn't resemble the shiny metal barrels used in modern competitions. "What is this? Did you get it from a museum?" someone said. Another added, "Nah, probably her grandfather's." Mia remained silent, because silence was her best armor. As she sat in a corner, waiting for her turn, Leo, the range's technical advisor, was watching her. His eyes weren't on her face, they were on her hands. The way she held the rifle, how she gripped the trigger finger. Someone who wasn't a shooter wouldn't know this. Only someone who had seen battle could hold it like that. But Leo wasn't sure. Maybe it was just instinct. That brief exchange of glances, the one where Leo carefully observed, trying to understand, and Mia's vacant eyes reflected nothing, was the sharpest dialogue of the day, though it was the quietest. The crowd kept turning to look at Mia. To them, she was a stranger. And more than that, she was a female stranger. There were rarely any women on the contestant list. There might be other areas for women, but this was about planting a bullet in the center of a target. And the rules were informal but clear. Here, intimidation was considered a man's job. "Look, I'm all for feminism and stuff, but this is actually funny," said Eric's teammate. "She'll cry and leave in 2 minutes." What a shame. Mia heard that too, but she didn't even turn her head, because somewhere deep inside, she had already made up her mind. This wasn't just a competition. This was her facing the last thing she had left from her past. But no one knew that, because no one asked about her past. She was thrown mud at her face, but no one saw the storm in her eyes. When the announcer over the loudspeaker called Eric's name before the competition, it was met with applause. Mia's name, however, was nothing but a murmur, as if it had been added last minute to the list. And in that moment, Mia lifted her head for the first time. She scanned the entire crowd. Then she looked at the target. Only one person noticed the silent thread in her eyes, Leo. And he thought to himself, if that woman is really who I think she is, some lives are going to quietly change today. But no one had pulled the trigger yet. Not a single bullet had torn through the air. And the storm was still raging only inside Mia. The hum inside the shooting range slowly turned into the impatient noise of a crowd. While Eric and his friends showed off their shots, Mia sat quietly on a metal bench in the corner. She was cleaning her old rifle with the tips of her fingers, but her eyes, as always, were focused on the target boards just like in the past. Leo, watching her from the side, had more questions in his mind. That stance, those breaths, these weren't just behaviors of someone trained with a weapon, but of someone who had lived with it. The rifle seemed like an extension of her. But why now? Why had this woman, whose name no one had heard for years, suddenly appeared? Eric, standing in front of the firing line, crossed one foot over the other in a flashy pose before pulling the trigger. The bullet hit near the center of the target. The crowd clapped. Nice, But you could have centered it more, Leo called out with a slight smile. Eric turned his head and shot Leo a condescending glance. Then his eyes drifted to Mia. Are you next? He asked mockingly. Hope your rifle fires. Sometimes nostalgia can't replace functionality. Mia didn't respond. She didn't even raise her eyes to Eric. But Leo noticed something then. Mia's fingers didn't tremble. Not even a little. If a person was nervous or scared, the smallest muscles would show the first signs. The fingertips, the corners of the eyes, the jawline. But Mia didn't show the slightest twitch. This kind of calmness could only belong to someone who had fallen once and stood up again. Then, the sound of a phone ringing startled Leo. A young officer approached him and said, The woman with the old rifle has missing registration documents. We couldn't find anything except her last name. Her history is empty. No profile, no license. It doesn't even show up in the system. Leo pressed his lips together. What do you mean it's not in the system? Everyone has a trace. But she doesn't. Mia's solitude wasn't just a behavior, it had turned into an actual invisibility. It was as if the world had forgotten her a long time ago, or perhaps she had left the world behind. At that moment, an image flashed in Leo's mind. A special training session he had watched years ago in a military camp. It was a test that only top snipers underwent. It involved stages like vision loss, disorientation, and focusing under stress. There had been one woman there that day. No one had said her name out loud, but the sound when she fired it had echoed in everyone's ears. Was it Mia? An announcement came over the range's speaker. The preliminary shots are over. Before the final tournament, one of the last 3 competitors, Mia Keller. Laughter spread through the crowd. They saved her for last so they could give us a chance to laugh, someone said. Eric turned to his friends. Get ready. It's going to be dramatically quiet. Mia stood up without saying a word. She didn't grab her bag. She just took her rifle and walked. Slow, deliberate, and quiet. It was as if each step carried a shadow of her past. When she reached the firing line, she fixed her eyes on the target but still didn't touch the trigger. Leo stepped forward. The crowd was silent now. Everyone was waiting for her to take the shot. But Mia didn't touch the trigger. She just stopped, waited, breathed, and then the past began to seep through. A brief scene flashed before her eyes. The sound of a helicopter, blood falling on her back in the muddy terrain, and a man's voice dash, You've got this, Mia. Don't go back, focus. That voice was still in her ears. It still kept her standing. But this time, she didn't pull the trigger. The silence continued, and Mia, without breaking her gaze from the target, lowered her head. Not yet, she said softly. Leo's eyes widened. Not yet? The crowd laughed derisively. So she's scared, some said. A few people stood up, murmurs started. But Leo was sure now. Mia hadn't come just to fire. She was at the beginning of something. And that beginning wouldn't start with a bullet but with a transformation. The second day of the tournament, the shooting range was packed even in the early hours of the morning. The sun had just risen, but the air inside felt like the calm before a storm. The staff was checking lists, competitors were polishing their weapons, and sponsors and the press were waiting backstage. This year's tournament had grown beyond ordinary, with the headline, Who will be the youngest champion? Spreading across the media. Eric's name was at the top, but Mia was still a question mark, and that was starting to unsettle some people. Her failure to pull the trigger the day before had caught the attention not just of the spectators, but of the organizers as well. She might have psychological instability, one person said. It might be better to disqualify her, said another. But Leo intervened quietly. She hasn't done anything yet. Not yet. When Eric arrived at the range in the first light of the morning, his eyes immediately scanned the area for Mia. It didn't take long to find her. Mia was sitting against the wall at the back of the range, dismantling her rifle and cleaning it. Her movements were slow but methodical. Every piece was being put back into place. Every screw turned with a single click, each motion with measured force. It was like a ceremony. Eric approached her, hands in his pockets, with a fake smile. Yesterday's performance was nice. Stepping on stage and staying silent must be some sort of artistic statement, he said. But this isn't a gallery. This is where results matter. You either hit the target or disappear. Mia didn't look up. Eric moved a little closer. Let me tell you a little secret, he said in a low voice. Someone like you could go down in history without firing a single shot in this tournament. But that history would be a joke, an anecdote to laugh at. Mia said only one sentence in reply. You're good with your words. Because when you're silent, no one notices you. Eric's face tensed. His smile faltered, but he didn't respond. Maybe the strange discomfort inside him came from the fact that, for the first time, someone had hit him with words. At the same time, Leo approached Mia. He had a folder in his hand. I need to talk to you, he said directly. There are gaps in your profile. But your hands don't lie. Mia finally looked up. Her eyes didn't carry an unusual hardness, but a deep weariness. My hands don't lie, but everyone makes up lies about the silent ones, she said. Leo paused for a few seconds. Then he closed the folder. Then, instead of talking, let's watch you, he said, and walked away. The tournament rules were announced. Today, there would be sequential shots and group eliminations. Each contestant would take 3 shots, and the ones with the highest scores would advance to the finals. Eric was in the first group. Mia, however, was last again. The sequential shots began. Every bullet echoed like a reverberation in the ears. After each shot, the crowd clapped. Eric once again made near-center shots, receiving praise. But his eyes were always on Mia. When will she give up? He wondered. But Mia, she waited. Her turn had still not come. Leo watched Mia from behind the observation glass. For a moment, he was able to look into her eyes. And in that moment, he was transported years back. The past, 7 years ago in a dark region, during a special operation. Leo had been on the field at that time. His team was moving forward with night vision scopes. But there was one person who wasn't even visible. Leo only remembered her voice. Wait, the wind has shifted. And then, the perfect shot that followed. The target had fallen, and no one had even understood what had happened. He could never forget that sound, that shot, that calmness. There had been a woman in that operation, codenamed Shadow. No one had seen her face, but her weapon had spoken. Leo never expected to hear that voice again. But now, that woman stood before him. Or, the echo of her. The announcement came over the loudspeaker. Next contestant, Mia Keller. The crowd murmured again. Eric raised an eyebrow. Let's see what she does this time when she steps onto the stage. Mia stood up. She grabbed her rifle. Slowly, she walked. Leo held his breath. The crowd went silent. But when Mia reached the line, she stopped again. She looked at the target. She held her breath. But again, she didn't fire. She simply knelt on the ground. And with her hands on the floor, she took a deep breath. Not yet, she said softly. But this time, her eyes were filled with tears. And Leo now knew something very well. This silence wasn't fear. This silence was the weight of the past. And one day, when that silence was broken, the whole system would crumble. Mia's second time stepping away from the line without taking a shot had stopped being an oddity amusing to the spectators. It had turned into an infuriating puzzle. The tension was growing within the organizing team, and sponsor representatives began grumbling backstage. What does this woman think she's doing? The event manager said. If she's not going to shoot, she should know her place. But among everyone, there was one person trying to understand this silence, Leo. In a brief meeting behind the scenes, the idea of disqualifying Mia was brought to the table. No registration, an unlicensed weapon, behavior that didn't follow the competition rules. We've got plenty of reasons, Eric said, his eyes gleaming with arrogance more than victory. Let's clean her up before this stupid show gets any bigger. But Leo stood up and grabbed the file from the table. This isn't a show. This woman is speaking louder with her silence than you all are with your voices. And the problem is, no one knows her. That's why you're scared. Eric smiled mockingly. No, we're just doing our job. Leo didn't respond. But the way he took the file from the table and pocketed it was a clear enough answer. That afternoon, as the tournament continued, Mia appeared on stage again. Last again. Silent again. But this time, her steps were more determined. The crowd watched her for the first time without speaking. Because now, curiosity had suppressed the mockery. When Mia reached the line, she lifted her rifle and focused her gaze on the target. Eric was watching. There was something in his eyes besides anger, unease. Leo watched Mia's breath from behind the observation glass. At that moment, an instinct told him something. The silence felt as if it had already pressed the trigger. Mia moved her finger to the trigger. And this time, she squeezed. The bullet didn't hit the center of the target, it struck the metal casing just to its left. A A small measurement sensor standing there exploded with noise. Sparks flew. The system shut down. The announcement voice cut off. Everyone stood up. Shock. The bullet didn't hit the central target, it hit a system component. As the staff rushed to the scene, Leo jumped from his seat. The crowd was shouting, "Sabotage! What's this woman doing?" But Mia stayed at the line. She lowered her rifle, took a deep breath. She turned her eyes toward Leo, and she said only one sentence. "I've shown where the system stopped. Now everyone sees where the real target is." Those words slapped Eric's face. The range fell into silence. Mia stepped away from the line. She didn't offer any explanation. She simply walked, leaving chaos behind her. But Leo's eyes followed her, because now everything was clear. This woman was an opponent hidden beneath silence. But she wasn't speaking with agitation, she was speaking with a single bullet, with a single message. And now, this war was no longer personal. It was about the rot inside the system. And the battle had just begun. That day at the shooting range, Mia's single shot was still being talked about. Yes, it had only hit a sensor. But what everyone had really noticed was something else. Mia hadn't aimed at the center target. She had aimed at the system itself. Not just her aim, but her message was right on point. Later that day, the organizing team held an urgent meeting. Media consultants, along with reactions from the sponsors, were put on the table. "This woman has overshadowed the competition," said one. "Eric's name is no longer in the headlines, the silent female sniper is. This is a crisis for us." Eric sat in the corner of the room, his arms crossed. His eyes looked dark. "It's no problem," he said. "Getting rid of her is easy. We just need to say the right words." And so, the official statement was prepared. Mia Keller had been temporarily disqualified from the competition for violating tournament rules, endangering technical equipment, and lacking proper documentation. Just then, Leo walked in. He looked at the written decision, then dropped the file on the table. "When did it become so easy for dishonest people to erase someone silent?" he asked. But no one answered, because Leo's question wasn't just about Mia. The system always chose the quietest to sacrifice in order to cover its own dirt. Mia received the news far from the range, in an old cafe. The waiter had extended his phone screen toward her. "Is this you?" he asked curiously. On the screen, there was a headline, "Woman with a hidden past sabotages shooting tournament." Underneath, in smaller letters, "Disqualified." In that moment, Mia's face didn't change. She just lowered her head, but the deep determination in her eyes. It was rising to the surface for the first time in years. At the same time, Leo had set out to find Mia in secret. He only had an old photograph taken at a training camp, the face hidden but the gun grip unmistakable. That woman he knew. It had turned into a matter of conscience for him now. Mia wasn't just a contestant, she was a talent quietly erased from the system years ago. And Leo had witnessed that erasure. Now, remaining a spectator would be a betrayal of his own past. When he reached the cafe, Mia stood up as soon as she saw him. "I was waiting for you," she said in a plain voice. Leo took the decision from the organization out of his pocket. "Don't forgive me. But know this, I'm not behind this decision." Mia glanced at the paper once. "It's fine," she said. "This is just a piece of paper. They can take me out of the system. But I've already seen their target." Leo was surprised. "What are you planning to do?" Mia's voice was clearer now. "On final day, at the last shot, in front of everyone. I won't just shoot. I'll speak." Leo held his breath. "Speak? That's a competition stage dash. Not anymore," Mia said. "It's a stage now. And this time, it won't be those who grow by staying silent. It will be those who speak that will be heard." When Leo looked into Mia's eyes, he understood she wasn't going to back down. That look was the same as the one she had years ago during the night operation. The look of someone who had nothing left to lose, but more importantly, the look of someone who was not afraid. As the final day of the tournament approached, the backstage was buzzing. Journalists arrived early. Eric was once again shining in front of the media. "I compete with numbers, not rivals," he said in an interview. "But some people only take the stage to grab attention." But a whisper was spreading through the backstage corridors. That woman is coming back. And this time, everyone wanted to hear what she had to say, because Mia's silence had grown in meaning. And now, it would speak far louder than any bullet ever could. It was the final day. The shooting range was more crowded than ever. The stands were packed, live broadcast cameras had taken their positions, and the atmosphere wasn't filled with excitement for the competition, but rather anticipation. But this time, no one was talking about Eric's victory. Everyone's eyes were still searching for the silent woman who had officially been disqualified from the tournament. There was no sign of Mia. Eric, however, walked like a star across the field. With his sunglasses on and his rifle slung over his shoulder, he posed for the media, smiling politely at questions. But beneath every answer, there was an underlying threat. I'm here. And even if you forget about her, I won't. And just as everything was about to begin, Mia entered through the door, dressed simply. With a rifle slung over her shoulder and her head held high, she didn't move from the back row. She walked directly to the front. She walked without stopping, ignoring everyone around her. Security guards stood still, unsure of what to do. This wasn't an infringement, it was a march. A march not of retreat, but of one who drew the line. Leo glanced at the security guard. "Don't stop her," he said, and Mia stepped onto the stage. The finalists had lined up. Eric stood at the back. The targets were set. The rules were being announced again. But when Mia reached the line, the sound system failed. Because, by now, the sound system was unnecessary. Mia placed her rifle on the ground. She didn't ask for a microphone. She simply turned and looked at the audience. "I was excluded from the system years ago, even though I followed the rules," she said. Her voice was clear, slow, but certain. Because sometimes the system doesn't see stepping out of its own rules as courage, it sees it as a threat. Eric laughed. "What's this now? A sniper manifesto?" Mia turned to him. "People like you have always been the loudest. But none of you ever felt the wind. You just watched the bullet fly." She picked up her rifle. She didn't aim at the target, but at the press board behind it. On it was the logo of Eric's sponsor company. Mia pulled the trigger. The bullet exploded in the center of the logo. The background shook, but the target was still intact. It was a symbolic shot, and everyone understood that. The camera flashes went off. The stands were swallowed by silence. Eric stepped forward. "Enough of this show. This competition dash," Mia cut him off. "No, this isn't a competition anymore. This is a confrontation." Leo stepped forward, holding Mia's file in his hands. "There's a file erased from the system 7 years ago. A sniper. A woman who saved hundreds of lives with a single shot before waiting for orders. But she was punished. Today, I'm making that file public." The file was handed to the press. Footage, voice recordings, delays in the chain of command. It all came to light, and Eric froze at that moment. Because a reporter from the media asked for another document. "Eric, how many times has your company manipulated the results of the competition with censor interference? Is this true?" Mia took a step back. There was no need for more words. Silence had done its job. By the end of the day, when the range had emptied out, Eric was arrested. His sponsor had pulled out, and the competition was canceled. But Mia was still there. Leo walked up to her. "Is it over?" he asked. Mia smiled. "No, it's just become visible." Leo shook his head. "So what will you do now?" Mia slung her rifle over her shoulder. "Maybe speak. Maybe teach. Maybe just teach some people how to listen." Then she turned and began to walk. But this time, she wasn't alone. People followed her. Young, old, men, women. No one shouted, no one was silenced. They simply watched her. Because Mia was no longer just a name, she was an echo. And that echo had been heard in the heart of the system.